o'clock here. And of course, with petrol prices are skyrocketing and expected to hit new record highs in the coming weeks, I suppose in an effort to save money, has the thought of filling up your car with a lower, cheaper grade of petrol ever crossed your mind? Well, New Zealand's Motor Industry Association, or better known as MIA, is urging you not to consider using a lower grade fuel than what's recommended for your car, as you could end up paying more in the long term. So joining us now to have a tell and all about the risks of doing so is MIA Principal Technical Advisor Mark Stockdale. With that, I say morning and welcome to the show this morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, Mark, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I think if anything, and maybe people should already know this, but I'd love to know the differences that we have between 95, even 98 and diesel fuels. What is actually the difference between all of them?
Well, yeah, there's basically three types of petrol that are available in New Zealand. 91 octane is the regular grade. That's the most common that people will be used to. But we do have a couple of premium grades, 95 octane, but also 98 octane, and that's sold by BP and Mobil at selected service stations. And in fact, in the South Island, there's a retailer called NPD that sells 100 octane petrol. That's their alternative to 98. So those are your three main choices. And it's a difference in octane rating, and that is to do with the compression ratios of engines.
And look, I know most of us have cars, right? But I think sometimes people don't actually know why cars or different cars take different petrol types. Why is that?
Yeah, well, as I say, it's to do with compression ratios. And so some engines have a higher compression ratio, or they may have a turbocharger. Now, that doesn't mean it's a performance vehicle. In fact, it's becoming much more common that you'll have newer cars. They will have smaller engines, and then they'll have a turbo, which enables them to do more work, have more performance, but you're still getting the fuel economy benefit of a smaller engine. But equally, you can have higher compression engines, and they tend to be for performance vehicles. So it's a mix. Either it's because it's got a turbo, or because it's a performance engine, and it's more highly tuned, and it requires because it has higher compression, it requires a higher octane fuel, which then combusts as it should. It performs as it should in that engine.
Oh, no, that's actually good to know. So then with that, any sort of insight into why other fuels are more expensive than others?
Well, it's to do with how much it costs to actually refine that fuel. So the premium fuels, the higher octane, they do cost more to refine, and they have additives in them as well that the regular grade doesn't have. Whether the extra cost is justified, or the retail price is justified, remains to be seen, but the bottom line is they do cost a little bit more.
Yeah. If you're tuning in, we are catching up with Motor Industry Association Principal Technical Advisor Mark Stockdale. Would love to know, though, of course, we were saying the temptation is, now that petrol prices are rising, you may want to go and start using cheaper fuel, but the risks of that, what are they, Mark?
Yeah, they're quite substantial. So the bottom line that the MIA is recommending is stick to the grade that your vehicle requires. And so if it has an owner's manual, check that and see what the manufacturer recommends is the minimum grade. Or if you're using a higher grade at the moment, it might be that you're using it because that's what the manufacturer recommends. That's been your habit, and we say stick to that. If you use a lower grade than is recommended, so essentially if you're putting 91 octane in a car that requires 95 octane or above, the risk is that you will do long-term damage to the engine. And that is because the fuel will actually detonate before it reach the appropriate temperature, and that can actually do damage to your pistons and other engine components, and it can also damage your emissions control system over time. So there's a whole lot of things that can go wrong if you're using a lower grade fuel, and that can cause a lot of damage, which would be very expensive to rectify. And if it's a later model vehicle, you also risk voiding your warranty. And there have been cases where this has occurred, and people have gone back and wanted to claim for the damage to their vehicle and at a disputes tribunal, and they've failed because it's been proven that they were using the wrong grade fuel. So that's very expensive. Whereas what people might be doing is trying to save a few cents a litre by using that 91 octane, and that saving is just not worth it compared to the cost that might be incurred by damaging your engine. So that's why we recommend not doing it. Stick with the higher grade fuel if that's what your engine requires. It's just not worth the risk.
No, absolutely. Do you sort of have maybe a bit of an approximate cost of what those long-term, damages could be?
In the thousands of dollars, and it can actually go into 5 figures. Wow. It's substantial. And one thing, if you do use a lower grade than is recommended, in older vehicles, you will hear a sort of a knocking sound. And that's the fuel detonating before it should, and so it's called knocking or pinging. So if that's occurring, then you know that you're using the wrong fuel. So that's a warning. But in more modern engines and later model cars, it's a little bit harder to tell because the cars can adjust for the octane rating, but it's still not recommended to use it because it can damage those emissions control systems and do other long-term damage. So we the idea that you might be saving 10 or 15 cents a litre by using that lower grade, it's just not worth the risk.
I suppose in saying that, though, is using a higher octane fuel in a car, that recommends 91, like good, and it will actually be able to save money?
There's absolutely no harm in using a high octane grade. So we have seen that there were some fuel shortages over the weekend, with some service stations running out of 91 because there was rumours that the price of fuel was going to go up quite a lot again.
Yes.
And people saying, oh, well, I'll have to put 95 in. Isn't that annoying? Well, there's absolutely no harm in using a higher grade than what your car recommends. It'll cost you a little bit more, but there's absolutely no harm. It's just what you want to avoid is going in the other direction and using a lower grade than recommended. A higher grade is absolutely fine. It's just going to cost you more. That's the only downside. Is there a performance benefit? It's marginal, and not enough to offset the higher price. So there's no advantage, but there's no harm.
And Mark, I would love to know then, as we wrap up, sort of maybe a real key message that you'd want our community of listeners to know this morning moving forward, since petrol prices are rising.
Don't change the fuel that you're putting in your car. So if you are putting in a high octane fuel premium, so 95 or 98, stick with that. You're obviously doing that for a reason. It might be because that's what the handbook says. It might be when you bought the car off the dealer said stick in premium, and that's been working fine. So don't change. Keep using the same octane fuel that you use. Don't try and substitute for 91 octane. It's not worth the risk.
No, I love that. So obviously, overall, it's just don't go down, go up.
Yeah, that's a good message.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, look, Mark, thank you so much for just giving us a little bit of insight into that. And gosh, let's hope that prices do actually eventually fall back down, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's what we all want.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, thank you so much for being on the show this morning. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
No.